I remember being attuned to the weather, hearing that it was going to be a rough afternoon, and thinking mostly about my son, because we live in Jeffersonville and he went to school at the time in Louisville. And I wanted to make sure we got him across the bridge and with us before the bad weather got in, because it was due right around the afternoon commute. And so Friday is my day off usually, and so I had some flexibility about picking him up early. But then we got a call from the school that they were closing at 1:30 to get all the kids home safely before the storms came in. So we picked him up and then we went home. And I remember watching on the television, and one of the Weather Channel guys, Jim Cantori, was in Jeffersonville, 2 miles from my house. And I put up on Facebook at the time, it's never a good sign when Jim Cantori is in your hometown. And when the storm started to blow through, when the sirens started to come on, my husband and my son and I went into our unfinished basement and sat on our lawn chairs. And it was kind of a joke because in Jeffersonville, nothing was happening except for the sirens. There was no fierce wind, there was no storm, there was no rain. And we were all on our electronic gadgets because it's a yucky basement and there was nothing to do. So my son had his Leapster and my husband had his Kindle and I had my laptop, and we were on the internet as the sirens were rolling. But I was watching the television on the internet. And as a pastor of the church, our congregation is scattered out. We have people in Pekin, we have people in Charlestown, we have people in Henryville, we have people all over from Corydon to Madison. And was watching the live feed on the television and began to see the footage coming out about Henryville and the school in particular. And I had several young women in my church, youth and children, that go to that school. And I immediately began to get incredibly anxious and slammed the laptop shut because I didn't want my son to overhear how scary things were just a little bit north of us, because I didn't want him to get frightened. And was communicating to my husband in code about what I had seen before I slammed the laptop shut, because I didn't bring headphones with me downstairs. And as soon as the sirens stopped, I began to get on the telephone. And I started calling all of my church members one after the other. And I called the grandmothers who lived in Jeffersonville, whose sons and daughters and granddaughters lived in the affected areas, because I didn't want to flood the phone lines calling them directly. And got word that some were okay, that some they hadn't heard from, that one young woman who was a senior at Henryville High School had left and had gone with her boyfriend's family to seek shelter, and when they got to the shelter, they couldn't get in because the power was out and the electronic lock wouldn't work. And the last thing Mom knew, she was taking shelter in a ditch. And nobody had been able to reach her, and it had been 2 hours. And the panic in those people's voices was unbelievable. And my panic, as I thought about this incredibly brilliant and beautiful young woman and where was she and what was happening to her, was unreal for several hours. And so finally, we discovered that no one had been injured that we knew in our church family. And everybody's home was still standing as far as we knew. It was only a couple of hours later that one of our families was in Florida, and their mom and dad were fine out in Pekin, but they drove by Barney's house and got a call that their house had been completely destroyed. And the family was in Florida and had no idea. And so the word started to get out at that point what the needs were. And that was a Friday. And on Saturday, it was mostly about still checking in and making sure everybody was okay and trying to figure out what to say on Sunday morning, because I had to preach. And here I knew church would be packed that day, because that's what happens. But it ended up not being so packed because we got word out that there was a need to help do debris removal. And so about 20 of our church members left at church at 8 o'clock in the morning to head to one of our members' homes and start getting the work done. And then the rest of us joined them after church was over. But trying to find a way to speak hope that morning and to name the trauma, because it was the first time people had been in the affected areas. They had been had been dealing with debris, but there's something powerful about coming together. And when you get in that worship space, the first time we ever gathered, all of a sudden, all the feelings started to come. And I knew they would, because that's what worship does. It holds all that stuff. And, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. Like a sneeze is coming on. But when we were in that, when we got together to worship, I remember asking the congregation to name out loud some of what they'd been feeling since Friday. And you had everything from anger to grief to relief to blessing to anxiety. I mean, just the whole gamut. And so we just sort of lifted that up and spoke the promise that God is still there in the midst of the storm, that our God is a God that doesn't run from the storm but runs to the storm and holds people in it. And I also remember knowing from my denominational training that the UCC, the United Church of Christ, their role in disaster is long-term recovery. That's what they do best, and that's what they're committed to. And so I had a lesson in what long-term recovery was from some workshop over the years. And so that Sunday morning, after we'd sort of talked about the trauma and talked about where God was in it, I talked about our church as a community of service and said that we're going to do what we always do, which is we're going to feed people, we're going to house people, we're going to clothe people, just like we do every day. And we're not leaving. We're not going anywhere. And we want to be the church that's on the ground till the very end, that is here until every person is made whole again. And I look back on those words almost 2 years later now and think, we're still here, we're still doing it. And that was really powerful to think of that whole witness and the way it's held up over the years. That was a long answer, but that's my story.
That's good. How has it changed you?
I think it's changed me personally in some of the ways that it's affected a lot of the survivors. Even though, like I said, nothing happened in Jeffersonville that day except me watching it on my laptop in my basement with my family. I've gotten less nervous when the thunderstorms blow now, but I will still watch the weather if there's any chance of a bad storm coming in. I will think about where my child's going to be and how we're going to be together and whether we're going to be in, what basement we're going to find. And I never cared about that before. I used to love to watch the thunderstorms come in on my front porch, and I don't do that anymore. I also think it's taught me a lot about resilience and watching the survivors, those who are able to continue to move forward, about what it takes to do that when you lose everything. The family in my congregation who lost their home and most everything in it have found a lot of strength and sustenance with each other. And the stories and the memories that could be recollected with one another in ways when the photos were gone and the material things were gone and the trophies or the prizes were gone, the shared memories became more important.
How did you connect up with March to Recovery and end up becoming chair?
The night of the disaster, our denominational disaster coordinator for the Inanna, Kentucky Conference, a woman named Mariana Speller, called me within 2 hours of the tornado. I had a wedding rehearsal that night. I had a wedding rehearsal that night and a wedding on Saturday. And it was going forward, even though they were coming down from Scottsburg for the wedding, which you could imagine from Scottsburg to Jeffersonville on the night of March 2nd. Nothing was timely. And I was in the middle of the wedding rehearsal, and that was at the time where we didn't know where this young girl was yet. We hadn't gotten a safe and well report on this high school woman. And I told them in the rehearsal, I said, if my phone rings, I need to answer it because I'm waiting to find out what's going on with this girl. And of course, that was fine. And my phone did ring in the middle of the wedding rehearsal, and I answered it, and it was Seth from FEMA. And I thought, how on earth did Seth from FEMA get my cell phone number? And apparently it was through our denominational representative who had spoken to me already and had told them I had people on the ground. And he was looking for on-the-ground reports. And I said, I'm in Jeffersonville, but here's who you can call. And I gave him 3 church members, one of whom was a firefighter in Henryville, one is a community leader in Pekin, and one was out in Charlestown, in New Washington, so close to the Jefferson County line. And I said, call these 3, they'll be able to tell you. And then our denominational rep said, there's a meeting on Thursday to get long-term recovery organized. Can you go? And so, of course, I did. And my initial leadership role in March to Recovery within the first 2 or 3 weeks was to step in as the chair of the spiritual and emotional recovery team, because I recognized early on the collective trauma that the community had been through. I had seen it in my congregation and knew that there was a whole community out there. Some of them were connected to local churches and some of them had no community that would support their healing, and we needed to have a witness to that. And the long-term recovery process called for that. So that was my initial leadership. So in the early months afterwards, we organized chaplains to be available at the Volunteer Reception Center, so that if both volunteers or survivors came in, there was a chaplain or counselor available to talk to them, and we got local clergy to volunteer to take various shifts. And then we moved on to sort of some longer term projects. Working with Carolyn King, we got a grant to offer academic support to children that had basically lost the last 2 months of school. And for a lot of those kids, it was going to set them really far behind in their academics. So we got money through communities and schools to organize a summer enrichment program for them. And they could go for free to catch up on their academics. We worked with a couple of other programs. We got free scholarships for the kids to go to local day camps, because that first summer, a lot of the kids were living in hotel rooms or in grandma's extra bedroom, and there was no room, and they were out of school for 3 months, and what were they going to do? And their parents were frazzled, and they were frazzled. So to give them a chance to go and just get out and do some normal kid things. We did things as the spiritual and emotional recovery team, like we wrote to a whole bunch of local attractions, the zoo and the Holiday World and the Bats and places like that, and asked them if they could give us free tickets. And so we could give these families that were going through so much just an outing. One night, the Sportsdrome invited 150 survivors to come and have a night at the racetrack. And the Bats gave us, I think, 450 tickets to Bats games, which was just a chance for people to get out for the night and remember that the world was whole and that they too would be able to go back and do normal things and to get out of the environment that was completely destroyed all around them. And that was really important. When the 6-month anniversary rolled around, we organized the churches to ring their bells. When the holidays came, we organized special Blue Christmas services and holiday concerts. We organized help for people to get Christmas trees and things like that. And that was all under the guise of the spiritual and emotional recovery team. And that gave me a seat on the steering committee, which when leadership transitions happened in the steering committee, there was kind of a vacuum. And it took me a while to say yes, but eventually I said yes to be the chair of the whole steering committee, which has just been a huge joy. Yeah.
And what have you learned most from this disaster?
Phew. So many things. I've learned a lot about, in general, the experience of disaster recovery and what that looks like. I think I've learned a lot about the experience of PTSD that people have, not just from disasters, but from all kinds of different triggering experiences, and about the healing process for that. I've learned things about construction, and I've learned things about case management that I never would have known otherwise. And I've also learned a lot about Southern Indiana. I am not native to this part of the world. I grew up in Virginia and have lived in California and Massachusetts before I came here. But I've lived here 8 years now. But I learned a lot more about the resilience of people here and the sense of community and coming together. And I've always said about my church, which is a good old group of Germans, that if you give them work to do or a project, they're really good at that. And that proved true of the whole community. There was this sense of well, this needs to get done, we'll figure out how to get it done. And that sort of collective energy of what's it going to take, and we'll figure out how to do it. And learning the depth of that in this community was really powerful.
So if somebody's looking back on this 50 years from now, 100 years from now, what would you want them to know about this place and this time in our life as a community?
I think I would want them to know, first and foremost, I think the only reason anyone would look after this kind of video 100 years from now is if they were trying to figure out their own disaster, or if they were working on their own disaster or preparing or something. And I would want them to know more than anything, you'll get through this. We did, and you will. Whatever that is. If you all work together, you'll figure a way out of it, and life won't be the same normal, but a new normal will come. And that would sort of be my encouraging word to the future. That you'll make it. We made it. And I remember in the first weeks after the storm, we were getting phone calls and people from Joplin, Missouri, and Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and New Orleans, all of whom had survived their own disaster. And they were coming here, and they were telling their stories and talking to us, and their message was, you'll make it. You know, it doesn't look like it now, but you'll make it. And they were only a year or two out. So 50 or 100 years out, you'll make it too.
Is there anything else you'd like to say for posterity about all of this?
It's not really a lesson learned, but I just want to bear witness to the most powerful thing, and the thing that has kept me going for the long haul is the amazing relationships with the other people. The partners and the friendships and the colleagues through March to Recovery have been so powerful. I feel like I've met the most amazing and dedicated and faithful people who are willing to do whatever it takes to serve others and to give of themselves in so many ways. And I look forward to coming to these meetings because the people are so wonderful to be around. And it's been an honor to work with them and to be a part of the same team and to share in this endeavor. And there's a real sense of accomplishment when we get finished with this, which we will eventually, to be able to say, you know, we did it. We got all these homes built. We got all these people back into their lives again. And we really did some things that help people heal from this process. So, yeah.